Well, let's go ahead and begin. Let me ask you a little bit about who you are and sort of why you're here today, what it is that you'd like to have covered. No guarantee, I can't change in midstream, probably, but I'm just hoping I'm not too far off base. I've chatted with a couple people already, and some of what they're interested in may be, it's related but not directly. So who would like to talk a little bit about what you're looking for today? Yes?
Well, just a curiosity is, I know Ben's been involved in doing Captivate lessons and theoretically do assessment within a Captivate tutorial, and I'd be curious to know about that, but in general, I'm here just to discover what's out there.
What I've learned about Ben is that he knows an incredible lot about technology and teaching, and that he may be his own, franchise. so until we sort of catch up, I'm actually honestly not familiar with Captivate. So, but okay. Okay, others? Yes.
I'm Bill Shea over in computer science. I've done quite a bit of online teaching and all, and just always looking for new ways of dealing with things like assessments and that. So
Good. Very nice. Okay, others?
I'm Clive Bulligoff in the psychology department, and one of the things that we're having to confront at the moment is a general perception amongst faculty that online instruction is qualitatively inferior to face-to-face interactions. So I'm always interested in looking at the evaluation and assessment of online learning to see whether we're actually achieving the same learning objectives in an online situation than we are in face-to-face.
That's a very valid question. And if distance learning is going to make the distance, it's got to show that it can. And I'll tie into that in our talk here. Good. What else?
Well, I'm a postdoc in biology, and my goal is learning. My next job, I expect to find teaching research. Teaching, I think, is good training for me for the future.
Very good. A lot of teaching jobs now do require the ability to teach using online. So maybe I should offer a little general background before I get started. And our PowerPoints are going to go a little bit long, so I hope you're all sort of patient with that. And feel free to ask questions, but we'll try to stay on a schedule here. I've been teaching online since the mid-1990s. I work with Washington Online, which is a consortium of 34 community colleges in Washington State. And I've used about 4 or 5 different courseware systems. And my doctoral dissertation was on teaching online and the role of trust. So trust in various dimensions related to the relationships that need to be made between the instructor and learners, learners and learners, learners and the curriculum, learners and the technology, and so forth. So it looked at multi-dimensional relationships. Anyway, so any other comments before we get started? Okay. Can you all see? Because I guess we apparently weren't supposed to have round tables. But okay, and all of you hopefully picked up a teaching goals inventory. So for those of you who are instructors, and if you want
there's also research and theoretical
on
underpinnings,
whatever,
and this is becoming more
whatever
and more
it is you may want
because
to
a lot of
assess or
people
what you care
jump
about to assess in your classroom. This inventory came from the Angelo and Cross book, which is here, and there's a copy floating around there as well. How many of you have already used this book before? Just okay. So one of you, yeah, and Shashti has it, and she's taking it around. Okay, should we get started then? Okay. So what we're looking at is we're looking at online assessment and student learning outcomes. So why do we assess? Okay, very broad question. I think you already touched on, some of the reasons. One reason may be to tailor the teaching to fit the needs and cognitive understandings of students, right? So we assess during the quarter to find out what students actually know and what they may not know. We want to alleviate the gap between what was taught and what was learned, right? So if you're in front of a classroom and you're teaching, you're saying one thing, you know your material very well, but for a student who has no background in that field, their perception may be very different about what it is that you actually said to them, right? So assessments help with that. And Angelo and Cross suggest that the best type of classroom assessment is centered around the learner, directed by the instructor, and it has to be mutually beneficial. It has to be pro-learning, right? So it has to be formative. So it's not something isolated from your teaching strategies. It's something that is very intimately tied into that. Angelo and Cross deal with face-to-face classroom assessments, but in analyzing the various assessments, virtually everything you can do in a face-to-face classroom assessment-wise, you can actually do online. And we'll talk about that, and if you have questions at any point, as I said, feel free to jump in. You don't need to necessarily take notes because this will be off of our IDTRoundtable website. So you can download it, and then there were 10 copies of PowerPoints for those who got here early. So, okay. So why else do we assess? We want regular feedback from students. We want to connect to learners. We want to create a sense of responsibility of learners to their studies. We want to reiterate the course goals and objectives, right? We want to make that explicit throughout the quarter because students may not know what exactly it is that you're trying to convey to them. And you want to have good reasons for appropriate and focused feedback throughout the semester. Now, why do we want different types of assessment? Why don't we always want the true-false test, always have the multiple choice test or the essay exam? Why do we want multiple types? Well, we have learners with different learning preferences and or learning disabilities. We want to promote greater amounts of interaction and mutual communications among learners over assessment issues, over learning issues, right? And we want a deeper sense of intellectual challenge in the learning community. And well-designed assessments can create that. Now, we talk about student learning outcomes. And every field that you have students in will have a different type of outcome that you're trying to achieve. And different fields will emphasize different things, whether it be ethics or a type of analytical ability or a certain attitude or certain skill sets. But in terms of mediated education, mediated education is education that has something between the instructor and the students, often technology that mediates that. And so in that situation, what are some outcomes we aim for good learning practices? One thing that we try to do is we want a greater sense of community, right? We want to create a sense of that even if you never meet the other students in the same classroom with you, that you still have a human connection, you still have a kind of human bond. And the theory behind this is called constructivism. And constructivism basically just says, how do you and I make meaning? We make meaning as a community. So we each bring something to this community. We each have some different insights. And when we all put our heads together and work on an issue, it's going to be a lot richer than one person's thinking. Okay? That's a very oversimplified constructivist point of view, but it's a very predominant one in online learning. And it also helps with student retention. Probably you're familiar with the research that says that if students have buddies, if they've got friends to hang out with, if they've got a hangout place on campus, like the student union, they actually, or an office or a club, they're going to do better. They're going to hang in, they're going to go for the long haul, and when times get tough, they're going to still stick it out and finish the degree. Well, that same concept applies online. So sometimes friends will take classes together. They'll say, hey buddies, let's go ahead and let's take this course together. So they recognize someone, right? Or they make friends and connect. Another outcome is individual identity and self-expression, self-discovery. We want individuals to grow. So based on what they learn, we want them to be more confident and be able to apply what they learn. Another outcome would be a professional field-specific mindset and commitment to certain values and ethics. Okay? Whether that is something that's made explicit or implicit, there are certain values in each field. In journalism, you may have values, certain ethical values of how you can gather information, how you define truth, right? What information you share, what you don't share, what are privacy laws, and that sort of thing. So other ones, we want them to master high tech for learning, for research. We want them to have a more analytical, logical, creative mindset. We want them to understand certain standards and practices within a particular field. These are certain outcomes that are general and apply to mediated education. We want them to improve their listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills. Now, for those of you who got on board distance education early on, you probably saw improvement on the reading and writing skills, a lot less on the listening and speaking, right? And the technologies are evolving and they're changing, and so some of these other skills can be brought online to develop for students. Am I going a little too fast and am I rambling? Okay. Let me know if I start. We want students to develop self-management and leadership skills. We want them to have the discipline to do well in these online classes, even though they don't have the four walls around them, they don't have a teacher standing in front of them, and they don't have the pressure of their friends sort of paying attention to them per se. We want them to have self-efficacy and academic confidence, and so on. Now, another way to look at outcomes can be the type of cognitive development you may want your students to have. And of course, Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy begins with the knowledge level. It goes to comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and it actually ends at evaluation. And there's a movement or a push to say, well, why don't we put creativity as the highest type of human?
Okay, we'll be starting here in just a moment or two if everybody's okay. Do we need more time?
Create new ideas.
Does anybody call for more time?
There. So those are just some learning outcomes when we talk about what we want for our students. It may help to have those designed before you create the learning to feed those outcomes.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so what are some initial things to consider?
Just give a couple more moments to wrap up.
You can begin with what is it you want to know, and is what you want to know accessible? Can it be measured? Can it be observed? The second thing is, what's the best way to surface this information efficiently? Because if it's going to take a long time to find out from, especially for those of you who teach very large classes, then that's going to make it de facto not usable, right? So we want it practical. What's the most fair, objective, and efficient way to gain this information? And how will I use this information to enhance student learning? Okay, one of the basic rules of research is don't ask unless you're going to use the information you're going to get. So if you're going to ask and go through that effort, and the effort for all of your students, that should then feed into a way to improve the teaching or the curricular materials, the interactions, or some other aspect of an online class. Now, Angelo and Cross in this book ask some questions. They set some broad standards for online assessment. And they ask about half a dozen questions. They say, is the assessment context sensitive? Is it specific to your particular field or group of students? Is it about a clearly defined topic at a given moment? Because an assessment is temporal. It is very efficient if it's deployed at the right time, in the right way, to get the right results, right? Or to find out the information. Is the assessment flexible and possibly usable in a range of disciplines? And that's essentially what we're going to cover in the last part of this presentation. Is we're going to look at college assessments used by professors, by thousands of professors that participated in this research. Okay? And hopefully you'll find some usable ideas from there. Is it likely to make a difference? Is the assessment focused on alterable variables, variables you can change or improve? Is it mutually beneficial to instructors and students, easy to administer, easy to respond to, and educationally valid? Is it educationally sound, pedagogically sound? Now, don't try to read this. It's not really readable per se. But basically, they have a cycle where you plan the assessment, implement the assessment, respond to the assessment. Some questions you may think of. Now, many of you who do face-to-face teaching know that your assessments are not all formal. Formal assessments are those that are mandatory. They affect the student grades. They're recorded individually for each student. And then you have a whole bunch of these examples on the left side. Informal assessments we do oftentimes by feeling the temperature of the class, right? We try to feel their mood. We try to listen to what people say, and those are more informal assessments. They don't impact the grade, they're not recorded, and oftentimes we use that information in the aggregate. That means we just take a whole bunch of that information, we don't identify students. So those are the two types, those are two ways to consider the assessments you may use online. You can have automated assessments or customized ones. Automated ones are those where you deploy the test, run the Scantron, or actually you don't run the Scantron. You just deploy the test and then you download the results and you have the grades ready to deliver, right? Or you can have customized ones where you have essay exams, papers, research projects, fieldwork research, right? That stuff is a lot more demanding in terms of time, in terms of assessments. Now, the rest of the slides are gonna kind of look like this. And I don't know how you're feeling patience-wise, but at the very top, we have the type of knowledge that the instructor may wish to gain. So the first screen has prior knowledge, recall, and understanding. So many teachers may want to know what prior knowledge students bring to a class, because sometimes prior knowledge can really confuse future learning, right? So you're not starting with a blank slate, you're starting with a full human being with all these inputs of a very complex environment. And because of that, you might want to do a background knowledge probe. So let's say you go into your online classroom, one of the first things you have students do is to determine where to begin your instruction. You help your students acclimate to your topic by asking them a few questions about what they think about certain things. And the reason for that is so you can surface their ideas and then address them. Because if you haven't surfaced it, then it's just you talking to them. If they bring it up, this is what their knowledge base that they're bringing to you, it's a lot easier to engage. You could do a focused list. You can have them list what they think are important points related to a topic. So you say, what is politics? List your top 15 points related to whatever you think of when you talk about politics, for example. You can have misconception or preconception checks. You want to surface ideas that may hinder accurate further learning, so that you can surface it, get rid of it, start clean, or start with a new construct, a new mental construct. You could give them an empty or partial outline after a lecture, before a lecture, and just say, okay, what logically would fit into these spaces? And that'll bring up discussion, for example. You could create a memory matrix where you can have them categorize ideas, give them a list of ideas, and say, in journalism, okay, what is an ethic, what is a policy, and what is a law? Okay, what goes where? And the way that they conceptualize it may tell you a lot about how they understand the classifications. You could have, if you were to do a simultaneous live lecture or have a simultaneous guest, so everyone's logged on at the same time, you have a guest talking to a bunch of people at the same time, then you could also, right in the middle, say, do a minute paper. What was the most important learning that's gone on? What remains unanswered? How can we use the remaining half hour of this time the most efficiently? Okay. Analytical skills and critical thinking is another category of thought that instructors may want learners to show accessible skills in. And so there are categorizing grids where you can have students make explicit their understanding of also categorizing of ideas, people, or objects. You can have a defining features matrix, such as the presence or absence of certain defining features. So if you're teaching geography, well, with this type of, for example, or geology, I mean, would you have certain types of features in this type of rock? You know, yes, plus, no, minus. A pro-con grid for an issue of mutual concern. So I'm going to go ahead and not bore you to death with the rest of this. I'm going to go ahead and highlight the types of thinking, and then I think these are quite self-explanatory for the rest of it. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to some other ones. Synthesis and creative thinking. How can you help people synthesize complex ideas, reflect what they understand? How do you help them come up with new ideas, say through concept maps, portfolios that they annotate, and invented dialogues, say of historical figures, that you can actually use by combining various sources, or in game theory, where you have people play a certain role, study a character very well, and then create the dialogue for that character, whether historical or living. Problem solving and metacognition. If you want your students to take the principles and the techniques that you've taught them and apply it to a live situation, here are some assessment methods that you can use here. And so giving them the language to talk about different principles, and then giving them the analytical skills to actually apply it to a concept. The bottom one here, audio and videotaped protocols in a face-to-face classroom would be complex. You would have someone like Ken in the back with a camera, or some way of setting up a camera for your students to use that. But online with webcams and with other ways, you know, some of that may be mitigated. Okay. Skill and application and performance. Okay. Here are some different ways to do kinesthetic learning. Believe it or not, there are physical education courses taught online, and you know, there are different methodologies for that. There are courses that require lab use. There's other ones where you have to kinesthetically interact, and we can talk about that some point. Attitudes and values. How do people feel, right? Because we know if people are feeling frustrated, angry, flooded, they're not going to listen, they're not going to learn. So to know the mood of a class may be a challenge, especially when you're online and students are studying asynchronously. You might have a little pocket of discontent. And how do you surface that? How do you know how your students are feeling? And so these are some ways to check that. Their self-awareness as learners, that whole, $50 word, whatever, metacognition. How are people seeing themselves? Are they conscious of how they learn, their best ways of learning, their preferences? Are they using their time well? Do they have good study skills? This is another type of assessment that instructors may also ask. And then reactions to the teacher and teaching. Oftentimes, instructors find out only at the end of the semester how students felt about them. And for teachers who are about to be assessed, many of you may know this, if you release the pressure valve a little, they're not as mean at the end. So you can go ahead, and actually it's probably better strategy to assess throughout the quarter, improve and adjust the teaching to make them happier, and then go forward. Reactions to class activities, assignments, and materials. Which assignments work, which ones don't? Are the points getting across? Okay, how do you evaluate and assess those? These are some different things, different approaches that can be taken. And then some other things to think about. Some instructors here do student choice assessments. They say, you can pick from this list of assessments in order to achieve a final grade. Do you want to write a research paper? Do you want to take a final exam? And then they have to add up the points ultimately to pass, and better than pass to go for the A. Or group assessments, getting groups together, and this can be done online as well, where you have a group of students put into a certain group or a category, and they work within that small team, and then they can respond to an assessment. Or you can even have assessments that are self-given by the students to see how they feel. And one very common example of that is to let students self-assess whether they're ready to study online. Okay, do you have the technology? Do you have the discipline? Are you interested enough? Are you motivated? Do you have a good supportive environment to help you? And then the last two screens, there are basic logistics questions. What instruments, what classroom assessment techniques or instruments would be helpful for you to collect data? How will you introduce the assessment to students? How will you integrate it into ongoing classroom activities? What techniques will you use to collect feedback? How much time can you devote to this project? You don't want to overdo it. What will a successful outcome look like? What kind of information will you get? How will you use it? And what is the minimum outcome you would consider worthwhile? Okay, so we're at the end of this presentation, or this part of it, and I'd be curious to know what questions or comments you may have, or ideas. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm interested on the idea of like a minute paper. So if you're having a, what do you call synchronous? Is that everybody's in the room? I don't know all these words, but if you're having a lecture and everybody's logged on, right? So you ask them to write a minute paper. Well, then how is that, what they're writing, collected to affect anything right there? How is that just logistically, how does that happen?
That's a great question. So a synchronous classroom is in time. We're in the same time
zone, and we're all interacting. So we're all logged on, as you said, at the same time. So let's say you have a guest speaker who has come in, and this person has been interacting with the learners and posting their responses to different ideas, and then the guest speaker is responding. Then if you do a quick minute paper, you maybe create a forum and say, everybody post your quick minute paper, take a minute, assess what you've heard so far, assess what other questions you may like to ask. And based on those findings, then you change then it changes the questions that the students ask. It changes the direction of what the guest speaker may say. It may change what the instructor focuses on, because they'll say, well, we're clear on this concept and this concept, but there are some other things that we're going to need more clarification on. So it will change it for the short term in terms of the types of questions and interactions that occur, and it will also change what can happen further down the line when the instructor maybe creates an assessment based on a certain unit of study that includes the guest speaker.
If you're the lecturer and you're standing there talking, what do you actually, are you going to read 30-minute papers?
Oh,
right
yeah.
There? And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The actual,
yeah.
How does it actually happen that you gather that? Like if you're in a classroom, you collect them and you might pick 5, but how?
That's a good point. There's different ways you can approach it. You can have a group, like a team, work together, and they all do their minute papers, and then so they only read like 10 in their small group or 5 in their small group, and then they maybe share their ideas with everyone else. They'll say, well, here's what our group came up with. They'll summarize it and then offer it. So there's ways to condense the responses and still make sure that people are heard and feel heard. And partly when you teach online, you kind of get used to a little bit more of the speed of it. You click, okay, yes, oh, click, yes, click. And then so you read, and so you can gain the gist of it. It could be a good time for a redirect. So for example, if students are feeling very frustrated, if there are, it can be a nice emotional valve to say, okay, let's debrief for just a bit, find out what's going on, hear what other people are feeling, and then go forward. So, it really, I think a lot of this can be used in unique and customized ways, depending on your teaching. Does that sort of answer some of it? I mean, I won't be able to, I'm not here to defend the book. And the book wasn't applied to online. Okay, oh good.
Classroom is just picturing like 30 people in 30 different places all across the country. So there's no group.
Can I jump in a little?
Please.
This is more, I think, just an issue of logistics.
Exactly. That's what I'm asking.
If you're in a synchronous situation, you're probably in a chat room or you're doing a live lecture where you're speaking out and they actually are typing in on the chat room.
Right.
What Charlene was talking about with the form was like using your message board. You could set up an individual thread or message and just say, okay, let's take a quick poll where everybody's at. Or what's our muddiest point? What are we missing? What do you still have questions about? Make a post. And in terms of logistics, just to make this possible, this would probably be a good time to say, okay, take 2 minutes to do that. We're going to have a 10-minute break right now. And then come back to your chat. Because then not only do you not have to worry about collecting all the papers, they're right there. It's going to be fast for you to go through. And that gives everybody a chance, because you know, if you spend more than an hour in a chat room, it gets to be a task. and that little break is going to make it's going to add a lot of life to your conversation afterwards.
Yes.
Another suggestion to cut that down is to make virtual groups and break them into 5 or 6 in a group and have them in their own chat room talk, and then pick out 1 or 2 of the best topics, and that cuts your work down. And so you get the main concept that they're missing condensed down to 1 or 2 topics that you can see on those different chat rooms. And then it's much quicker to get to the point.
And it puts the responsibility back in their court to read and analyze and to know what their peers think as well. Yes.
And another thing, if you're using like if you're doing like a simulcast, most of those tools have an upload facility so that you can just say, here, do your paper, write it up real quick using Notepad or WordPad or whatever, and then hit the upload button, and then I can go through it from there.
Yep, that's another great way to do it. Yes.
I'm more interested in the asynchronous situation. You know, one of the pedagogical tools that we found is really very, very useful is a threaded message board, where you have a sort of a really nice transcribed text of what students have discussed and the engagement in the discussion. I'm just wondering whether you've come across any instrument that basically assesses that kind of text record in terms of the extent to which it achieves student learning objectives, etc. In other words, how do you go about specifically evaluating critical thinking using that as a database, basically, at the end of the semester?
There's a researcher whose name I don't remember, but he wrote about the idea of recordability. The fact that in an online classroom, every interaction is preserved for posterity. You could go back, it's an archive, you can see the interactions that have gone on. And it's been brought up. This was back in 2002. It was brought up at that time that you could actually assess the quality of communications between students. And they actually created rubrics. It's the Jossie Bass, or however you say this publisher's names, is the Jossie Bass series on distance learning. It's like teaching and learning. Are any of you familiar with that? It's a thin series, and we've got a couple of those books in the IDME office, the Instructional Designer's office. If any of you would like to borrow it, just let us know, and we'll be happy to let you look at it. But they talk about it.
You have an automatic 1-minute essay. If people are sort of responding to a question online, they basically are sort of posting a 1 or 2 page text, response to that. But in addition to that, they're also interacting with other students, so they become like a community of teachers, and it's trying to assess the interaction between students that I think it becomes very, very important social goal. And you talk about audio taping, videotaping students. I mean, there's a wonderful record of their interactions if you've got something like a threaded message board that you can analyze.
But major technological challenges to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah. But yes.
I was just going to add, if you wanted to do an online search, you might search with keywords computer media and communication, and then find some other techniques.
Yeah, I have done that search, and I've come up with extremely elaborate but highly unpractical sort of rubrics for assessing. And they require sort of 5 independent raters, and these raters tend to differ in terms of whether they think critical thinking has occurred, etc. And it becomes, I just wonder whether there's a practical and feasible rubric that you can easily apply to such text data.
Let me catch your name, and actually I can send you a copy of this article because it has some really good rubrics.
Great.
That would be helpful.
There's another book, though, just want to throw it out there, Understanding by Design, and I always forget the author, who actually has some very straightforward rubrics and approach to assessment that I think you might find useful.
What was the name of that again?
Understanding by Design. And it's some very pragmatic approaches to assessing things like message boards and so forth, and using rubrics in a meaningful manner. And a lot of it has to do with how you set up the activity to begin with. Because if you're a little fuzzy on that, then it's really difficult to actually find out whether there's any measurable criteria that the students are meeting. So a lot of it's in the foreground work.
Thank you. Maybe Ben will send you something too.
We'll add that to the list.
Okay. Yes.
You mentioned you were teaching online since mid-1990s, and you've used several different packages. Are you free to share which ones were in your opinion, were the best that you used?
Has to be Axio now. It has to be K-State Online. Yes. I can talk to you off record in a bit. My boss may see this. Okay.
Well, you ought to have that discussion though, because I've tried, WebCT and Whiteboard and stuff, and there's plus and minuses on all of it. I mean, there's not one package that I've seen that's got it all in there. And Scott's trying to modify, through our input, those elements that he can improve on. But
they're doing a fantastic job.
If you don't discuss the pros and cons, then...
And I agree with you totally. I myself have used a good half dozen of them, and I don't think there's a silver bullet out there among them at all. None of them are really fully meeting the demand. What I've enjoyed about working here at K-State is that they actually do listen, and then over time, a lot of suggestions have been implemented in. I know from my past experience with working WebCT, that was like throwing paper into the ether. You were never going to hear a word about it, and in fact, you were lucky if they told you that there was a bug in the system. And I've heard of similar horror stories on Blackboard. People losing whole semesters because they didn't archive things at the appropriate time. So there are some faults here, but I like is the immediacy of our people, our response. And yes, it's not perfect, but they're sure trying, and they're still trying. And that is a unique situation in many ways. It really is.
But that might be a useful thing to do.
Oh, I agree.
Discussion on, those people that have used it, what are the best practices and so forth. I did a little study on what K-State uses as well. It surprised me. What you think is not necessarily what the students think.
Yeah, that's also true. That's a good point. Did I see some other comments back there? Yes.
How do you deal with this kind of these issues? My distance learning students are not synchronized. They're scattered out over different semesters. They've got jobs. And I can't get it in one semester, get them to finish the course just because of their work commitments. They're all working mostly full-time. This kind of stuff is not going to, it's hard to use this. What would you use?
I have a question. So are your students, is it an open entry, open exit sort of a course, or are you just saying they're taking incompletes?
Well, they're taking incompletes. I always grant incomplete because most of them are returning students. Some of them are older, younger, have jobs.
I think you're a nice.
About half of my students finish on time if I'm lucky.
It may help to do an assessment to find out what the challenges are. Some things, if they are lifestyle issues, if they are financial issues, there's very little control you have over any of that. If it's an issue of empowering them in some way, giving them tools, giving them more understandings, emailing them regularly to see how they are, to make sure they haven't forgotten you. If a phone call helps, a lot of teachers will send out cards at the very beginning of the semester to all their distance students to welcome them, to tell them where to log on, to say, here's my phone number, here's my email, call me, contact me, let me know if there's anything I can help you with or support you with. There are ways to sort of create a cocoon of support around a student, but then I would also say that if there are other life issues, it's I don't know, what would, Shashti, what do you think?
assessment would be a good way to find out.
Well, I get a pre-course survey, so I get all that.
Right.
And I tell them to call me, I want to talk to them in person. I usually call back too. Even that, I think, is better than email. Because then you have a chat, it gets to be time consuming at times. But when we talk about these type of assessments, like the 1 minute thing, that could drag on for a year. Plus, about half of them would probably send me a question and want to make sure that they send me an email. It's like, now what do you want again? Would you explain this?
You know,
But if there's some other ideas on how to deal with these type of students, I'd like to hear about it.
could I get your name as well? And then we'll try to brainstorm a response for you as an Idea Me team, and then we'll respond to you. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you. Do you need a pen?
I mean, rather than a quick 1 minute solution right here.
And you could borrow some of the strategies that are used in open entry and open exit courses. You could start clumping your students together into support groups. So the ones that are if similar places in the course together can help each other and assist each other, and that might take some of the burden off of you, so you're dealing more with the group instead of individual students. And that also might make it easier for you to get them motivated too, so that they have a support network.
Yeah, we found that
Great
very
idea.
interesting in the MILE program, where there was an opportunity. You provide students an opportunity for face-to-face interaction, either through segments of the course taught on campus, or alternatively to suggest that generates an incredible increase in the commitment to the course. If they just know who's at the other end of the computer, it really does generate a sort of a high level of commitment.
And they're trying to use telepresence to do some of that, or what they call social presence, to have a teacher very present, like very real there. And so it's partly how you might portray yourself. I mean, I'm not sure, but yes.
Well, that brings up another question. I wonder if you all have researched, and perhaps you can answer this question. What if the design of his class is great for face-to-face, but is there any study, I'm sure there is, what are the results of studies out saying, I can cover this much face-to-face, but if I try to cover that much in an open entry, open exit, I can't do it. Is there correlation between the type of class and how much content you can put in it?
You mean the hybrid model, where it's partly face-to-face and partly online. And there is research on that, but not a ton yet. Yeah.
And in fact, our next session is discussing these very issues. What is truly the difference between a face-to-face course and a distance course? And what are some of the challenges you're going to be facing with each other? And we'll probably even fall into discussing about hybrid course, because I think in the next few years you're going to see more and more and more of those, because there's too many advantages in using both formats at once. Not many downsides.
A lot of this research is very interesting because it's contrary to what we're accustomed to, because we look to those Research One institutes to get information about this, but the people who are doing it are in rural schools and private schools, small private schools whose livelihood depends on it. So I know that through CanEd, the Kansas legislature funded technology program here in Greenbush in southeastern Kansas has been doing K-12 distance learning for years. They're very connected. We answer all these questions probably.
Yeah, I think it's great talking to practitioners instead of just going to the research. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah, I learned about the distances in Kansas when I came to interview for the job here, which was a couple, as soon as I got lost, I drove south instead of east towards Kansas City where my flight was going to go out of. And so I figured out that there was a lot of distance here, so I thought, you know what, that'll be good, I'll have job security. So, but yes.
Two things about the gentleman's question about 50% of the students getting incomplete. Could you respond to the first idea of building in incremental goals or objectives so that when these people are not meeting them it becomes apparent to them and apparent to you, so you can provide an early intervention, and if nothing else, they can have the opportunity to say, well, I'm going to drop this right away, which they do in face-to-face classes all the time. And secondly, there's another component coming up. I'm continually working with high school students who really want to do online education. And so that's a very different group that's coming at us now than the ones who are busy working. These kids, a lot of them have already figured out how to incorporate the technology into an already busy life. And so that problem, I think, is going to diminish as the students are younger.
And it may well be so. And then the challenges would come from different other areas. But I think that was a very good instructional design point that you just made about incremental, like early successes are very important to retain a student. So when they first come in, to let them be successful, in posting, be successful in sharing their ideas, expressing themselves, and then you move on. So from, and a slower start, maybe making a course available a week before the actual teaching starts, so they can come in, wander around, download stuff, figure out what you're about, get a sense of things. There are a lot of strategies, and we're going to be developing the ID website as a resource to have downloadable information about that, and we're going to try to have more of these. So if you have suggestions for roundtables you would like, Shashti is heading up she's administering all the roundtables, so let her know what you think might be good, and then and we'll see what we can do to maybe bring some research and stuff together.
The other thing I was thinking of in courses like this would be to have policies, stipulate what you're looking for. I think a lot of times there's no roadmap in the course, and the students just don't seem to know what is expected. It's okay to have goals and objectives, but also to have like specific deadlines and specific policies saying this is when I need this, and if you don't do this, you get a 0 or something. Just as an example.
To take that, we're talking about assessment, but I think that's probably the key issue, because I've been doing it about 10 years now, and I do an assessment every year and every semester, and it's evolved. I can see it evolving because students are changing when they come in, and they will tell you, and I've tried different strategies. I've tried to put all the quizzes up, do it at the end of the semester. You can take them any time. And of course, they wait till the last minute and they don't get them done. So they want, in their feedback is, they want the daily quiz or the weekly quiz to be rated as, because it forces them into that discipline. So you can see trends happening through their own assessment, and I think they're pretty open and honest about it.
The other issue that I think you mentioned was going slow early and give them early successes. If you don't give them a real simple experience to practice the technology, they get lost and gone. So you've got to give them that early success. Yeah, you're doing this right, and that they can contact you for help. That it's easy to get a hold of you. You've got to respond real quick to them in the very beginning, so that they get those early successes. Oh, this isn't so bad, and they really appreciate that success, and you're a lot better off.
And you can't assume they know it.
You can't.
You've got to do the simple things and build on it.
That ties in with the instructional design model of arcs, which is like grabbing their attention and making the content relevant to them. And then once they have the satisfaction, they have the confidence, which stands for arc. And that kind of ties in.
I think it's often, just a process of providing students with feedback on their performance, so that if they're not doing well, why aren't they doing well? And personal feedback, I find, is extremely important. That you write them an email saying, you're doing really well on the test, but I noticed that you're not doing so well on these assignments, and this is why you're not doing well. So provide them with that kind of feedback early on, and not necessarily just at the end of the course when you have a final assessment.
It would be really cool to have some sort of a website or something electronic where everyone who works in distance learning maybe could share some of their ideas and practices and insights, because I think there's a lot of experience in this room, and people could benefit each other. I don't know much about the campus culture yet. As I said, this is only my 3rd week here on this campus, so so I don't know if you could all head out to lunch with everyone at your table at some point and talk about these, or if there's some other venue to share some of these. But I think it would be good to sort of continue that dialogue and share. So, are there other comments or questions or? Yes.
I do this at every ID conference I go to. I try to remind people that we talk about instructional design for distance learning or online learning as though we had ironed out all the problems with face-to-face stuff. And I think that we talk about this, I think we talk about this as though, will it be as good? I have too many years of education to operate with that. So I think it's really good to leave a lot of that face-to-face stuff that never worked for you behind. I really do. When you come into this, I think it's really important.
I think that's a very excellent point, and it's good to take some time to actually think about what has worked, what hasn't worked. You know, how do you carry your persona and your personality and yourself into this digital space? You know, what technological tools do you have to really reach into that space? You know, and yeah, I think those are all really good things to think about, and I think we may all come up with very different answers depending on the students that we work with, the context that they're in, you know, what their needs are, you know, our own teaching styles, that sort of thing.
And I think, you know, on the other side of that coin is that students bring to the distance classroom the same baggage that they have in face-to-face classrooms. In face-to-face classrooms, I think students are far more passive learners. They sit back and they listen to the information. In distance learning, I think in order to get students engaged, they have to become more involved and more contributory. So you're developing almost like a community of teachers, especially in my area where I'm dealing with people who do have professional status. So they're bringing, you know, experiences that I don't have as an academic in the ivory tower. So I think it's getting rid of that baggage, that people come with a traditional model of what face-to-face education is like that really isn't appropriate. And I have students complaining that, you know, just in a threaded message board, they have to spend, you know, 8-9 hours a week writing responses to assignments that are posted on a threaded message board, which they never got when they were in face-to-face situation. You know, they could probably write it off in about 30 minutes the night before the assignment is due.
Okay. So what we could do, I don't know, it's we have, I guess, half an hour officially left. We could take some time. I can talk a little bit about this and then just introduce it. I won't make you actually do it. Because I actually heard that right at about this time is when most people have other commitments, and so I didn't know. And they were convinced I was going to take an hour and a half just to do the PowerPoint. So we didn't plan much else beyond this. But what this is a self-done inventory where you go through and you talk about, you rank how important this particular learning is for you to develop the ability to apply principles and generalizations already learned to new problems and situations, for example. And you go ahead and evaluate, and you evaluate each of these in terms of what it is you want for your students. And then at the very end, you have a little table where you can calculate what your main learning areas are. And based on those preferred learning areas, you can then take a look and see which of these assessments might be helpful to you. And if any of you are interested in this book, we have one to lend also from the IDME library, which we only have 6 or 7 books in, but we'll add a lot more pretty soon. So, you know, if any of you need any feedback or would like some support, please feel free to email us or come by and see us. We're down at the College Court building in rooms 161 through 164. If you need to move, if you have other classes or lunch or whatever, feel free. And then if others want to hang out and work on direct issues for their classes, feel free to stay. And then there's 3 of us here to help any of you. So, okay? So thank you so much for coming.
The Landon Lecture
Chemicals
Series.
are developed.
I would like to take a moment to congratulate all of you who are graduating today with virtual commencement.
Kansas State University's Office of Mediated